Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, I greet everyone with the traditional Islamic greeting and extend my warmest invitations to everyone here. First of all, let me acknowledge the efforts of the Sydney University Muslim Student Association and thank them for the opportunity to address yourselves on this most important topic. I understand this is part of the Islamic Awareness Week, which I believe is coming to an end very quickly. So let me express my gratitude for the opportunity and let me acknowledge their efforts in trying to generate discussion and some important debates around some of the most important considerations today. I'll be talking about Islamic economics, and because of the time frame, I'm sure everyone will appreciate that it's not going to be the most extensive presentation. If this was a full day symposium, we would have some considerable discussion with considerable detail, but I warn everyone that this presentation will be high on rhetoric and low on detail, but deliberately so. So if we're expecting otherwise, I have already catered for that. So I've emailed the chaps from the Sydney University Muslim Association this presentation and a more detailed presentation I've done on a previous occasion, which provides a lot more considerable detail upon some of the points that I will be exploring today. So if anybody does would like further detail and further information, that information is available if you contact the Sydney University Muslim Student Association. Again, if this was a full day symposium, this is Islamic Economics 101 in a nutshell, in graphical form. Because what I would like to start with, of course, is to draw a connection between the talks that have been given in the first week and the talk that I'm giving today. Because as I understand, there have been discussions about some of the creedal foundations of Islam, its core ideas, the rational basis upon the core fundamental Muslim beliefs. And I'd like to stop on that just for a moment, because what SUMSA is acknowledging and what it's trying to present, based on the titles and based on the discussions that have already been had, is establishing in very clear terms the divine nature of Islam. And not just establishing through a whim, but upon a rational basis. And so in essence, what's being described so far is that Islam has in fact being revealed to us from our Creator. And the Sydney University Muslim Student Association is arguing, of course, that this point can be determined, and in fact must be determined upon an entirely rational basis. And so, okay, well, how does Islamic economics come into the matter? Well, if something comes from our Creator, which we acknowledge, if we acknowledge this point, by extension, you would expect that the Creator will prescribe solutions, mechanisms to cater for every aspect of our life. That it's not sufficient that the Creator can provide injunctions for certain aspects of our lives, whether it be the individualistic aspects or the ritualistic aspects. No, you would expect clear prescriptions for every facet of our life. And so I would expect that if someone came to me and claimed that they have something from the Creator, I would expect necessarily that I want to see detailed prescriptions on how to systemize our entire lives. And this systemization should apply equally to Muslims and non-Muslims, to those who adhere to the faith and don't adhere to the faith. But that's a very powerful, that's a very profound call. A very profound call, and I expect to be challenged on this. And every Muslim expects to be challenged on this point, because it's a core creedal consideration. And so yes, in Islam you will find detailed prescriptions on economics, as you will find detailed prescriptions on how we pray and the rituals of prayer. You will find detailed prescriptions upon the judiciary in Islam. You will find detailed prescriptions on how to form government in Islam. You will find detailed prescriptions on how to establish an education system in Islam. You will find detailed prescriptions on every aspect, whether it is individualistic or whether it is collective, whether it is the personal or whether it is the political. And it is this point that I'd like to draw everyone's attention. Because the discussion we're having today is not disconnected from the discussions that have happened in the previous week. Because one necessarily is an extension of the other. And it's important to appreciate this discussion in this light. Now, enough with the introduction. If I was going to describe the economic system of Islam, I would describe all of this. But I'm not. I'm not going to attempt to, purely because we don't have the time. But let me very briefly discuss what I would have discussed. First of all, naturally I would start by drawing context. The first three boxes you see on the top, man's vicegerency, economic science versus economic system, and the basic economic question. And again, I'll reiterate, for anyone who may have walked in a little late, this presentation and a more detailed presentation is available via SUMSA. So if you would like copies of this, then please advise accordingly. So please don't write it down. I'd rather have a more productive, interactive exercise. But the core consideration, let's start from the left, man's vicegerency. Muslims understand their clear responsibility in front of their Creator, that we have been placed upon this earth, right, by our Creator and for a specific purpose. Not left without guidance, not left without determination. And so when it comes to the issue of economics, that the utilization of all the collective wealth contained within this earth and our collective abilities, again, is conducted or enacted in a manner that is entirely consistent with our overriding purpose in life. Meaning we're not left to do anything as we please. We can't go and plunder the earth. We can't go and cause environmental catastrophe. We cannot acquire wealth in any way we see fit. We cannot establish monopoly. We cannot, engage in any sort of anti-competitive practices. And so everything we do within economics, just as everything we do outside of economics, is done within the parameters defined by Islam. And this is the first and most important point I would have elaborated on if this was a full-day symposium. I'd like to stress also the difference between an economic science and the economic system. Because what Islam provides is an elaborate system by which we regulate the acquisition and the distribution of wealth, and specifically its ownership and its utilization. Islam does not tell us how best to produce the wealth, which minerals to go after, which form of manufacturing to employ, which type of industry should we pursue. Islam does not tell us that, just as it does not tell us whether I should pursue accounting or economics or go into medicine. No, these are the empirical sciences which are the domain of man. But it's the role of Islam to direct how we engage in these empirical sciences. And so the economic system that I'm describing is a system that regulates the acquisition, distribution, and the utilization of wealth, not its production. And this is important because it's important to draw a clear delineation between the role of Islam in managing affairs as opposed to the role of any system which can potentially serve as an obstacle to the management of affairs. The basic economic question in Islam is not one of limited resources with infinite demands. We believe, as a matter of creed, that there is an abundance of wealth in this world to provide for the whole of humanity. Whether the population is 1 billion or the population in some point in future becomes 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, 100 million, whatever it may be, we believe, as a core element of our belief, that there is an abundance of resources available to cater for the core needs of the whole of humanity. And this is very profound because for us the basic economic question is not how we can continually produce more wealth. No, the basic question for us is how do we equitably, and I didn't say equally, equitably distribute the wealth that already exists. And there are clear references in the Quran and in the words and the example of the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings be upon him, that demonstrate this point very clearly. Now, again, if this was a full-day symposium, I would elaborate upon this point. The whole economic architecture in Islam centers around three core considerations. First is the ownership, about how you can acquire wealth in the first instance. And it talks about private ownership, it talks about public ownership, and talks about state ownership. In essence, how, in origin, we seek to acquire wealth. And there is an elaborate discussion about the myriad manifestations of how we go about acquiring our wealth. Second of all, if we do have the wealth, then how do we dispose of it? How do we spend it? How do we invest it? This is the second of the three core considerations when it comes to economics in Islam. And so you'll find various and elaborate discussion around the various notions of industry, the various notions of trade, the various notions of how we can spend wealth, how can we invest wealth. And that's what I describe broadly as disposal. So Islam talks about agricultural-based industry, trading, which effectively includes anything to do with buying and selling, and industry relating to manufacturing. And then, of course, Islam goes further and describes in clear terms and unambiguous terms the prohibited means of disposal. References to gambling, reference to usury, references to anti-competitive practices, to fraud, deception, and there's a whole elaborate system behind that. And then, of course, it's not just enough to acquire wealth and then to dispose of it. How do we ensure that the wealth that already exists and has been acquired is distributed equitably throughout the whole of society? And here we talk about distribution. And I've got an Arabic reference here, Bayt al-Mal, which is the Arabic reference for the central treasury. And again, clear prescriptions on the source of revenue for the state, and clear prescriptions on the ways in which the state will expend the money that it already has. And of course, part of the two core considerations on top of that, when it comes to the question of distribution, are the fundamental elements of the prohibition of interest-based instruments in Islam, and the issue of currency and its establishment upon a metallic standard.
Excuse me, could I just ask with that side, what's the difference between public and state? Public and state?
Okay, in essence, one is public is the collectively owned by the citizens of the state, and here both Muslim and non-Muslim. If you are a citizen, you are the collective owner, part of the collective ownership of that. State ownership is reference to specific assets which are the sole determinant of the state itself. A very simple example of that, of course, is public ownership over the collective resources, and so its utilisation must be performed in a way that benefits the people, whether it's through directly offering them oil or electricity, or of course selling to them, but they being the beneficiaries of the revenue that is derived therefrom. The state ownership is specific sources of revenue, specific taxes that the state enjoins upon the people, and the state determines the method by which they expend that. And so the difference is, when it comes to public ownership, its utilisation is prescribed clearly in the Islamic text. So the state does not have an independent say in how that particular wealth is distributed, because Islam very clearly categorises and defines how it is to be utilised. That is, in a nutshell, the difference between public ownership and state ownership. Now that is very broadly the Islamic economic system. Now again, I'm not going to pretend that we can give justice to this discussion if I was going to leave it on this level. And so what in fact I am going to do is to take things a little differently. If we were to engross ourselves with the economic considerations in Islam, we would find, we would be able to arrive at a set of conclusions which very neatly summarises the core elements of the Islamic economic system. And so what I hope to describe today are two broad considerations. That what are the Islamic economic objectives? What is it actually seeking to achieve when it comes to economics in Islam? And two, how exactly do we go about this in fulfillment of these objectives? Please come in.
Well, I don't want to come in the front way. Where's the back way?
I don't believe there is a back way. I think there's only one entrance. So please help yourself. So what I will be describing today are the core Islamic economic objectives and the core means by which we fulfill these Islamic economic objectives. So let's take the first. The first and most important consideration is the securing of food, clothing and shelter as a bare minimum for every citizen of the state. Now it does not mean, let me put a disclaimer, it does not mean the Islamic State is a welfare state that is going to provide food, clothing and shelter, by a whim for all people at all times. No. It means the state has a divine obligation to ensure the people have the ability to provide for themselves these core considerations. Now, yes, at times you will find people, for whatever reason, may not be able to provide for themselves. Yes, the state is obliged in those instances to provide, but it is not the core. It is not the core consideration where the state provides the food, clothing and shelter for all people at all times. It means the state is obliged to ensure that people can provide for themselves these three core considerations. And the style I'm going to adopt today is, in fact, I'm going to provide just brief evidences and brief references either from the Quran or from the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessing be upon him, that demonstrate these points very quickly. The first reference is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad. He says the Imam is the leader of the Muslims, the Khalif, the political leadership of the Muslims. The Imam is in charge and he's responsible for his citizens. Establishing the broad injunctions for the leader over the Muslims and over all citizens of the Islamic State. That in essence, if somebody goes without food, clothing or shelter, the state is responsible for him or her. This is an important consideration, because when Islam looks upon society, it looks upon society in a collective manner, just as it does on an individualistic manner. Meaning that we cannot draw broad aggregate determination and say, okay, GDP or GNP is of such a value and therefore the collective wealth of the people of this country is increasing. We don't leave it at that. We don't leave it in those broad terms. We ask, does every single person have the three core elements that is enjoined upon the state? Does every single individual, every citizen of the state have food, clothing and shelter as core elements? And of course the luxuries are a matter that is beyond that. And so we say the leader is responsible, the Muslims are responsible to ensure that every citizen is provided his basic necessities. And of course, in clear terms, that is another reference from the Prophet Muhammad, the son of Adam has no better right than he would have a house wherein he may live, a piece of clothing whereby he may hide his nakedness, and a piece of bread and some water. And the only reason why I chose these two particular references is just to demonstrate clearly in Islam that there is an overriding obligation upon the state to ensure that these three elements that are necessary for the survival of every human being, right, is provided by the state. And so it is not sufficient for a state just to view things on a collective level without ensuring that every single citizen is provided these three core considerations. The second economic objective is to encourage economic activity. A clear reference in the Quran, O you who believe, spend of the good things which you have earned and of that which we bring forth from the earth for you. Again, if we had sufficient time, I will demonstrate very clearly how profound this particular reference is. And there are many references in the Quran similar to this. That it's not just sufficient that we isolate ourselves from the world and adopt this ascetic approach and we detach ourselves from reality, from economics or from politics. No, everything has been provided for us as human beings, and so utilize them for the purpose for which they have been provided. So spend of the good things which you have earned. Don't neglect, don't neglect your responsibilities in this world. Don't, develop this disdained attitude towards wealth or towards economics. No, just use it in the manner that Islam prescribed. Just don't go beyond the bounds. So utilize it, enjoy it, consume it, invest it, work with it, because the benefit is the benefit far extends the individual himself. And this is the nature of the economic cycle, that purchasing a can of Coke at the local grocery store is not just simply a purchase of a can of Coke. This is the perpetuation of the economic cycle that contributes to his income, and that income will obviously spread to the rest, etc., etc. Right? And importantly, when I was talking about vicegerency, Right? The reference here that we bring forth from the earth for you. This is a reference from our Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, instructing us that these matters have been provided by Him for us. And so with this develops a certain conscience in the minds of the Muslim, a certain attitude towards wealth, a certain attitude towards economic activity. That it's not, we don't develop either of the two extremes, where one, we shun all economic considerations, or two, we manifest them in whatever way we see fit. No. Accept the responsibility that comes with that which is being provided for you, but engage those the wealth and the activity in the manner that Islam will commend. And again, the similar meanings comes out of the second reference. So walk in the paths of the earth and eat of His sustenance which He provides. Again, reference to our vicegerency, in reference to encouragement of economic activity. There are many references similar to this. Encouraging the circulation of wealth. So not just let's just do things and then sit back. No, let's keep the cycle moving. And one clear reference here in the Quran, again, that it does not become a commodity between the rich among you. This is a specific injunction in Islam related to a specific commodity. But the general principle equally applies to all manner of economic activity and all commodities and all forms of trade. That what's being enjoined here, or what's being condemned, is an adoption of an economic practice that is inherently exclusive. Inherently exclusive. And so you're trying to corner the market, or you're trying to introduce artificial disturbances in the natural economic cycles. And so this practice has been condemned, and very strongly condemned, in the Quran. And again, this is a portion of the reference, and if we look at the particular references and what came before and what came after it in the context of Revelation, you would be astounded as to how harshly this particular practice is condemned in the Quran. And there are references from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, again, further condemning any particular anti-competitive practice. Again, the second reference, say, who has forbidden the beautiful gifts of Allah? Allah is the Arabic reference for the Creator. Who has forbidden the beautiful gifts of Allah, which He has provided for His servants, and the things clean and pure? Again, an attitude that came up that had the potential to introduce a mentality that, again, develop a disdain towards worldly things. And the same question that. Who instructed us to develop this mentality? Who established the correctness of this mentality? And this was challenged very strongly. And so no, don't develop this ascetic view of the world. Don't introduce demarcations between the personal and the political and economic. No, all of this has been provided for us. So again, utilize them in the manner that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands. Again, the third reference, and let not those who are niggardly, who withhold the gifts which Allah has given them from His grace, think that it is good for them, rather it is worse for them. Again, this is a specific reference to a specific practice, but the broad principle applies in almost every sense, that don't restrain your hand, in fact do the opposite. And so there's countless references in Islam from the Quran and from the example of the Prophet, where we are encouraged to give, whether it is in charity, whether it is in assisting others, whether it is in loaning, providing loans, whatever it may be, but to give. Don't just acquire wealth and then keep it to yourself. The emphasis in Islam is on its complete opposite. So in every way we're encouraged, and there are countless references that demonstrate this. The fourth core Islamic economic objective is maintaining stability in the market. And there are, again, many references of which I've chosen two. Again, one particular wording of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that one of the companions asked, I said, O Messenger of Allah, there comes to me a man asking me to sell what I do not have to sell, then I buy it from the market. And that should be it. He said, do not sell that which you do not have. I want you to think about this for a moment. Right, take your mind back to 7th century Islam, 7th century Arabia. Remember, wealth was measured in how many red camels you had, how many sheep you grazed, and God knows whatever other consideration. Yes, there were coinage and currency, but this was a time, remember, we're talking about Bedouins, right? People who had their roots in Bedouin lives, people that were isolated from the rest of the world up to a certain time, and we have this clear reference. And the message and the injunctions contained within it far surpasses anything that could have been immediately in front of the people at that time, because the message is timeless. And again, why I emphasise at the very beginning the connection between what was discussed last week and what's been discussed this week is because we believe in the universality of Islam and the timelessness of Islam. That it is not a religion that was revealed to a certain people at a certain time who lived in a particular context. No, this is revealed to the whole of humanity until the end of time. And so the clear reference here is, do not sell that which you do not have. Again, in the global financial crisis which we've witnessed and the destructive consequences of the financial markets, these references could not be more relevant today. They could not be more relevant. So you cannot sell something which you do not own, which was really one of the the primary causes of the global financial crisis. You know, the whole question of derivatives and its impact, its destructive impact upon the real economy. Again, another reference, and those who hoard gold and silver and do not spend them in the way of Allah, let them know that a severe punishment is awaiting them. The relevance of this, right, is when Islam prohibited hoarding, it expressly prohibited the hoarding of gold and silver. And it's important to realize this because what's important is that gold and silver are the basis for the Islamic currency. And so what in fact this reference is saying is that anyone that introduces artificial disturbances in the money supply, right, he or she will be severely punished because of it in this life and in the next. And this is very profound, because when Islam prohibited the hoarding, it expressly prohibited the hoarding of the two commodities that form the basis of currency in Islam. And so again, when you talk about stability in the market, you cannot, the people do not have an opportunity to introduce practices that will introduce artificial disturbances to the supply or the demand of money or any commodity. Again, from another reference, a saying of the Prophet ﷺ, again, trade gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, etc., etc. And the only reason I introduced this particular reference is that there are certain commodities in Islam where you're very specifically enjoined as how you actually trade in them. And it's gold and silver and wheat and barley and the rest of it. But the two first commodities is what I want to highlight here. Again, the two commodities that form the basis of the currency. If you're trading gold for gold, what this is saying, this is a reference to what we would consider usury in Islam. And the relevance of that, of course, is that Islam does not provide, it closes every opportunity to introduce any exploitation in these core commodities. This is important to appreciate. It closes the door. So I cannot take one type of gold and exchange it for another type of gold. I cannot take advantage of one man's predicament and seek to engage in a transaction which ultimately will not benefit the whole of society. So I cannot exploit people's conditions. And so Islam put the brakes on immediately in some core commodities and very strictly enjoined how we should trade in them. Again, from the other angle, eliminating artificial barriers to entry. Again, remember 7th century Arabia, Bedouins, people that used to ride donkeys and horses. Clear references, no one monopolizes except the wrongdoer. This is the clear reference, the wording of the Prophet ﷺ. No one monopolizes except the wrongdoer. When the Prophet expresses these sorts of words, what it's saying to the Muslim is that not only is this practice condemned, this practice, if you engage in this practice, you will be punished in this life, and importantly for the Muslim, you will be punished for it in the next life. And there is no other motivation, that can be more profound for a Muslim except the consequences of an action in the hereafter. And so, yeah, we have clear prescriptions for today and now in reality, but it also has clear consequences for us in the next life. And again, relating it back to our core creedal considerations, there is nothing more profound a motivation for a Muslim except the consequences of actions in the next life. Because it'd be very easy to get around any system, any sort of regulation. We all know that. But as a Muslim, we believe that if we are able to hoodwink a certain individual today, or get around certain regulatory requirements tomorrow, or to palm off a certain regulatory authority the day after that, the consequences for us are still the same. That whatever we are able to hide today, we can never hide in the next life. And that's important, a very profound consideration for the Muslim. The connection between what we do in this life and what we do in the next. Again, another reference that the Messenger of Allah forbade that the foodstuff be monopolized. Again, just a reference to monopoly, and there are other anti-competitive practices that are equally condemned in Islam. Again, another reference, but it's only going to say the same. Maintaining certainty in trade. O you who believe, when you contract a debt for a fixed term, record it in writing. It's not an option for us. It's not an option. How many commercial disputes arise, even with clear recorded contracts in writing, there are still a myriad of commercial disputes out there. And in fact, some may argue that the way contracts are written today is the cause of many disputes, but that's a whole other discussion. But we leave nothing to chance. Nothing to chance. Again, Islam closes the door for any element to creep in where you will introduce uncertainty, or introduce disputes, or you will introduce doubt in whatever it may be. So record, if you contract a debt for a fixed term, record it in writing. Again, this is one reference. There are other references relating to other economic practices. Another reference from the Prophet said, I said, O Messenger of Allah, there comes to me a man asking me to sell what I do not have. Then I buy it from the market. He said, do not sell what you do not have. Again, the reference that we made reference to previously. But again, if we do not have clear ownership and clear title over any commodity, that we are not in a position to engage in any economic transaction in relation to it. And so even the conventional mortgage that we see around us today, from an Islamic point of view, we regard that as an abhorrence. Because when we sell something to someone, the title is transferred immediately. It's not dependent upon other considerations. It's not dependent upon the repayment, or meeting certain conditions. And we cannot even introduce two contracts in one. So we cannot stipulate a commercial transaction on condition of the execution of another commercial transaction. So we cannot relate, we cannot mix the two matters. But again, if we had the time, I would expand upon that. Discouraging welfare dependence, one of the core Islamic economic objectives. Again, a reference on the Prophet's words again. He shook the hands of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, one of his companions, and found his hands to be rough. When the Prophet asked about it, Sa'd said, I dig with the shovel to maintain my family, obviously for work. The Prophet kissed Sa'd's hands and said, they are two hands which Allah loves. The Prophet ﷺ said, nobody would ever eat food that is better than to eat of his own hands' work. Again, the reference, not to this particular type of trade, it's not condemning anyone who sits behind a computer, but praising those who are able to provide for themselves, provide for their families. And again, connecting it to the consequences in the next life. And so there is no greater source of motivation for a Muslim than knowing that your actions are going to be praised in this life and especially in the next life. And I keep stressing this point because it's something that's so distinct Islamically that it's not just, this is not just a lecture about economics. Because Islamically, I cannot detach what I say about economics from what I would say in regards to any other topic. And so there's a clear connection between this matter and every other matter in Islam, this life and in the next life. And again, another reference in the Quran, it is He who portion out between them their livelihood in this world, and we raise some of them above others in rank so that some may employ others in their work. Again, there are many messages that can be taken from this, but what I want to emphasize here is the last section of that some may employ others in their work. One, first of all, acknowledging that there is going to be unequal, let's say, distribution of wealth in society. Again, that is a natural phenomenon. Different people, different abilities, different opportunities, whatever it may be. We're not prescribing a world, or we're not advancing a world where everyone will be equal, everyone will have an equal share. No, Islam acknowledges that if you put the effort, you get the reward. And it's stated there clearly in the Quran that if we raise some of them above others in rank, and again, so that some may employ others in their work. Again, if you have the money, you don't have the labour, then come, bring the two together. If you have capital, then employ that capital, let others utilise it. If you cannot do it yourself, employ others to do it. If you have the labour, then find someone who has the capital and join together. Again, this is a natural consequence of I would describe it as a natural economic cycles. Sometimes you have labour, the ability to work, others you have access to capital, and those considerations will change. Sometimes we have access to capital today, another day we'll be deprived of it, sometimes we'll be have working able bodies, and other times we may not. The balance between private, public and state property, and to be fair, of course, this is an enormous discussion. And all I want to do at this stage is just to highlight this point, that yeah, in Islam we have clear delineation between what is private, what is public and what is state. The state cannot come in and take away anything that is inherently private ownership. The same way, an individual, any citizen cannot come and usurp something which is public property, and vice versa, and as the three delineations go. The only reason I wanted to emphasise this is that Islam implicitly recognises that there are different motivations and introduces different incentive schemes for the various manifestations of economic activity. But again, it also acknowledges that there are some matters that cannot be owned by individuals and therefore deprive others of it, and vice versa. There cannot be something which the society or the state will own that deprives the individual of it. Islam places very clear delineations. So in terms of Islamic economic objectives, these are the 8 summaries that I've put down. Security and clothing, food and shelter, the core elements of survival, encouraging economic activity, encouraging the circulation of wealth, stability in the market, eliminating artificial barriers, maintaining certainty in trade and discouraging welfare dependence, and developing a very profound balance between the private, the public and the state. But it doesn't end there. It doesn't end there. Well, okay, if these are the overriding objectives, then well, how exactly does Islam seek to manifest them? And this is where the discussion gets interesting. Well, first of all, Islam completely abolishes all interest-based arrangements. And again, let me say from the outset again, that I've got 10 minutes, roughly, to get through all of this. And if you ask any teacher, they say, if you find yourself, beaten by the bell, let's say the first rule is don't rush through it. It'd be better just to cut it. It'd be better to cut it and then follow up the next lesson. I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to ignore that, and I'm going to rush through it. Only because the more I expose, the more discussion we can potentially have. Again, what is the